I'm really excited to introduce Eileen Murray. Eileen has been a friend for quite a while and has an illustrious career in financial services. You spent 20 years at Morgan Stanley, were a management committee member, Credit Suisse for many years, and now you're on several boards, Broadridge, Guardian Life, and HSBC most notably, maybe not the most fun, but most notably. And formerly you were the chairwoman of FINRA.
Yes.
A Domino customer. Nick mentioned earlier about the petabyte data sets they're processing with Domino. And Compass and even DTCC for those who know.
Ago.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And of course, nonprofits as well.
Yes.
Irish Arts Center. I'm really excited to have Eileen here because she has a board perspective. And I think as we're talking about how to get AI built and out into a lot of our organizations, understanding for senior management and then their relationship with the board, what's going on, what's the narrative, what's the story that needs to be told. That's a perspective that I hope you can help us
do the best I
bring.
can.
And so you, just to sort of warm us up, you work typically with CIOs and technology groups at some of the companies you're on the board.
Yeah, I'm basically, for some of the boards I'm on, I'm the chair of some of the tech or COO committees. And so I spend a lot of time with tech management, the CIO, as well as the COO. Sometimes those are split, sometimes they're together, in terms of getting ready to help the board understand what's going on in those spaces, which is critically important to the board to perform its governance role. And it's hard. Yeah. But yeah, that's what I do.
Sweet. Okay. Well, maybe we start with talking about the value of AI. So we're in this, a couple of years into this new big hype around AI that was sort of kicked off with Gen AI, and almost every organization is trying to transform their organization, or at the very least experimenting and trying to get real value out of AI. So how does that trickle up in your organization? What are you seeing? And
sure, and in addition to the organizations I'm on, I was recently at another panel with a bunch of directors from various companies to talk about this topic. If you asked me 2 years ago, on everybody's lips, oh, you have a problem? Just use AI, just use AI. It was kind of like, you got a headache, take an AI pill. Yeah. And without thinking through, what really needs to get done. More recently, and there's this study done by, I think it was Deloitte, 55% of board members would say AI is not discussed at their boards, and it should be. So what's been happening, I think, in the big companies is that some have been very methodical about it and a lot have not. And what I mean by that is there's been a lot of experiments throughout these big villages that haven't, anchored themselves into the strategic goals of the company. And so what's really helpful to both the board and I would say senior management at a lot of companies is for those that run technology to really help them understand the value of AI in terms of competitive advantage and how it can really transform some of the major strategic business goals. So what we're doing on 2 of the boards I'm on is we've looked at the top initiatives across the company. And of course, we're looking at architecture and value streams and data, which I want to come back to, and AI, and how can AI play a role in this in terms of opportunistically, but also making sure that we deal with the risks appropriately, which then gets me to data. And I don't need to tell the people in this room how critical data is to getting AI to work really well. So what I'm seeing in the companies I'm in right now is AI is being done more on the efficiency side. So for example, you'll see a lot of underwriting, due diligence, or where companies outsource a lot of their activities to offshore locations. They don't really offshore the risk and compliance functions really for a variety of reasons. And so they're starting to use AI in those instances. And when I say use AI, there's whole committees that have been put together to really look at AI in terms of, is it being instantiated in the risk management culture? Does it tie to the overall goals? is the business on board with doing this? Because if they're not, it's kind of a little experiment. And how does this come together? And then I guess the last tension I would mention, people look at projects and they're kind of like, what's the ROI? Well, I don't know the ROI to some of these projects. You have to experiment a little, and you have to, kind of stage it and look at it as you go. And a lot of people get uncomfortable when there's not a numeric, here's the ROI on it. So I'm incredibly excited about AI. I think it can actually help us with some of our data issues, which are vast throughout the villages around the globe. And I'm also excited about, as a board member, how it can really mitigate risk and how it helps me as a governor. So I have to read for each board meeting something like 2,500 pages. And I went to Catholic school, and I had never had a problem in it, for anyone that wants to ask. And I actually read it all. And so AI is helping me to really become more efficient in that. Or I did this panel on something else, which was pretty interesting. And I had hordes and hordes of information, so I ran it through ChatGPT. It changed my conclusion, which made me spend more time on it, which, by the way, I still don't agree with it. But anyways, the value of it is just incredible, and you can see it everywhere. So coming back to the board perspective, how do you tie it to strategic goals? And then the next question you're going to ask me, and I'll wait to ask me, is how does that get there?
Yeah, well, I was gonna go back and highlight.
Did I answer your question?
We're getting to it. We're getting to it. So there was this world of take the AI pill, lots of experimentation, but kind of in the, maybe the bowels of the organization, or it's maybe the technology.
A lot with the developers.
A lot with the developers, the technologists starting to do that. And so, now aligning to the business, are you seeing that as a top-down initiative, or are you it's still the organization like reconfiguring? And related question, has experimentation given way to focus? Like, okay, we've experimented, now we have a couple of things that we definitely want to go nail at large-scale program, or is it,
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think it has to be both.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, yes, a lot more focus has been brought to it, particularly in institutions that are regulated bodies that, you don't want people experimenting if you don't understand what's happening with data security, if you don't understand what's happening with cyber. If the business wakes up one morning and says, why am I paying for this? You need the business at the table. So much more focused in terms of tying into the strategic priorities and how can AI be more effectively utilized, but concurrently putting in structures, governance structures in place, because a lot of us on the board, we're not experts in AI. We're not experts in technology, and so we need expert advice. We need to make sure that what we're hearing is really what makes sense. And so there's that piece. And then the last piece is, yes, there's experiments that we're not really sure what the ROI on this is going to be, but we're going to do it anyway because it seems like it'll have big impact. And then the other piece is training and development. I mean, I'm on one firm, you'll know which one it is, where 9,000 people have been trained in technology on AI. Now, those 9,000 people, obviously, you want to help them understand what some of the rules are around that. But the training's pretty significant, and there's ring-fenced experimentation, let me put it that way.
And say more about what that means. Ring-fenced, small group, small team, get started.
Small groups, small teams, and ensuring that you're employing standards that, basically will comply with regulation in the different jurisdictions. Yeah. And those standards really do need to be brought to bear. And if you're not going to comply with those standards, when I say ring fence, like really in a box that's not going anywhere or sneaking out anywhere.
Right. We're not sending all our material, non-public information to Microsoft.
Yeah, or there's a big focus on bias. And how do you prove bias or not prove bias? And, people will tell me, well, Eileen, there's always been bias. And you're absolutely right, and there probably always will be bias. But the pervasiveness of this technology is what worries people about the bias, much more so than ever before. And in every regulatory, you can look around the globe, in Europe, a lot of regulation, different countries in Asia, I don't need to tell you, Singapore, Australia, China. I mean, the regulatory regimes here are becoming very focused on AI. And, my hope, and I'm talking to a few people to see if we can do this, is I don't think regulation should strangle something.
Sure.
It should, but I do believe we should have guardrails. If we don't get together as industry with some of the regulatory bodies, I think we run the risk of regulations, going beyond what we need to do. So I'm really a big promoter of treating the regulators as clients, and I was that before FINRA.
Sure.
So that we all can work together to get to a reasonable place. And again, the technologists play a critical role in helping people understand what can be done, what can't be done, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So maybe digging into that regulation piece for a second. We're very interested in this. We've launched a governance product recently. We sort of see the emergence of regulation as one of the drivers, not to mention the back pressure of more and more AI models needing to be pushed out there. But you mentioned different geographies and there are different regulatory regimes. I think what we've seen is Europe is kind of leading, and to your point, maybe even has a bit of a stranglehold. And then in the US, we were on a path until maybe January of this year. We were on a path of more regulation around AI, and then suddenly we're sort of off that path. But I still get the sense that it's there's a lot of talk about it, and it hasn't actually trickled into the regulators. It's still more, everybody's still sort of figuring it out.
I think that's right, and that's why I think there's an opportunity, and there's also a danger. I think there's an opportunity to work with the regulators to put something in place that is more guardrail-like.
Yep.
Versus, look, if something goes wrong, like you can just look throughout history, when something goes wrong and there's not a regulation in place, take Sarbanes-Oxley. I have nothing against it, but there's a little bit of overkill there. Sure. Why was that? We go through one situation after Archegos. What happened after that? Something more recent. So I think if we get ahead of this, we'll be in a much better place. And the work that you're doing on governance frameworks is incredibly helpful to boards, but as important to management. Because if you look at the senior-most managements of a lot of organizations and the boards, really smart people, but people that need to continue to learn and be educated and talk to experts on how this works and how you might govern it. So the governance framework is incredibly helpful. There's different articles out there on it, et cetera. But actually having something that is practical that you can instantiate, I think would go a long way, and also save firms a lot of money and a lot of what's the right word? Save not just a lot of money, but a lot of time and effort by doing it. Go back and look at it. Nah, that's not really what we wanted, and so I think there could be a lot of help with that, and boards would certainly appreciate it. I'm going to go back to, I said to you, 55% of boards say this topic isn't discussed at the board. I think it should be a regular board topic. I don't think this should be a technology initiative. I think it should be instantiated and co-run with the businesses in terms of what can you do to improve your competitive advantage. Some of the work we could do for clients much better than we do today, beyond efficiency and, probably things I'm not even imagining in terms of new products. So I think we're in the infancy, and I think it's a really great time. And I worry about companies that don't take this, it's hard to catch up. Yeah. So to me, having a product like that would probably help a lot of companies get through some of the fears they might have in terms of moving ahead on this, to demonstrate that they're doing it in a reasonable and responsible manner.
Yeah. Speaking of fear, banks, insurance companies, at the end of the day, one of the things they do incredibly well is manage risk.
Yes.
Or go out of business, right? And so there's an incredibly long history of building risk models, statistical models, quantitative models, all of that. It's occurred to me that there's great risk management and great governance and regulation in place for that, but somehow AI is different, and probably in some ways it should be treated differently, and there's new things that need to be done. But in some ways, probably there's a lot of the same. I don't know if you have a take on that. What's unique about sort of the newfound AI that's different than
I think that your point about models have always been out there. They'll always be out there. And AI is an opportunity to kind of put it on steroids is the way I look at it. In terms of the vast amount of data that you can pull in and convert into knowledge through models. So I don't really personally see it as much different than a model. And a lot of the frameworks around AI are frameworks that have been in place for the last 20 years. And I'd like to say longer, but they're not. And you can look at some of the debacles. Some people in here might remember value at risk. And when that first came out, companies were using value at risk as this is how much money I could lose in my trading books. And you looked at the numbers and you're like, geez, you lost a lot more than that a year before. Then the Mexican crisis hit and it was like, oh, the model didn't accommodate that. So, you learn a lot about models, what models work in certain environments, what don't. I think that's the same with AI. I don't think it's viewed the same way as a regulatory matter. And I think that's because of the power of it to do it so pervasively and expansively versus previous models are kind of contained to an area.
You have the wonks working on the quantitative models, and now you have AI touching everybody in a bank or
potentially, yeah.
And even customers, which is probably a whole.
Yeah, I think for the customers, yes, absolutely. And so you need to make sure that things work well. But I think most people are reasonable. There's going to be mistakes in this. Yeah. And if you show a process that you were diligent and thoughtful and responsible, how you went about looking at this in your framework, and you made a mistake, you're going to be in a lot better position than someone who didn't do that. And the second piece of it is, there's so many things out there where people see there's an error or there's a mistake and they don't do anything about it. That's a problem too.
Yeah.
But I'm incredibly excited about the power of this. Yeah. I think it's going to change the world. On the other side of the coin, I think one of the things we didn't touch is how do employees feel about this? And how to, you'll hear a lot of people talk about in offshore centers, they're going to use AI to replace a lot of the people. Well, if you're one of those people there, or you're someone who's, someone's saying, oh, we're going to apply AI and get rid of this job. Well, how are you retraining these people? How are you getting them on board with this new technology? I think is another consideration. And as a board matter, thinking through those staff transitions is important.
Have you tackled that in any circumstance? Or is it still?
Yeah, I mean, not completely. Yeah. But look, the first thing was, to be honest with you, what's the inventory of where we're utilizing AI? Yeah. Believe it or not, there was no inventory of it. What are the practices we're putting around that? Is it instantiated in the risk management? Do we have our legal and regulatory people looking at it? And then what does it mean for our employees? And for a lot of the initial ones, it's actually great for employees. So if I can take underwriting and insurance, if I can run this through an AI model and get what I want probably in a half hour versus 5 days of information, I feel pretty good about that. You still need me to look at it. Yeah. But there's going to come a point where you don't need me. Well, how am I training those people to come up one level more in terms of, so we are looking at the training and development of the people, not just in terms of applying AI in a standardized way, as well as opening, I'm calling them ring fence, that's probably a better word, places where people can experiment, where you can pretty much be rest assured it's not going to the rest of the organization. And how are you retraining people that are being displaced? And I think that's going to have to be not just a private initiative, but also a public initiative.
Well, it occurs to me that probably the first thing to do is have a perspective on it and communicate it to people, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because at some point it's going to flip from, hey, I'm getting helpful AI tools, I'm getting better at my job, I feel better about it, to, wait a second,
well, in the underwriting one, people love it. Or if you're looking at hordes of transactions in financial services, and you want to see, you need a price on certain types of bonds, wow, that's terrific. I don't have to go run through and look at that. Or if you want to look at the skill sets that you have in different regions against what your strategic goals are and the skill sets that you'll need, and you're dealing with 80,000 people, AI is very helpful. Yeah. And so people like that. Or, a lot of asset managers are using it now to pull information together, to help them better support their clients. but there's also people right next to them to make sure that information, and there's still errors, and it'll continue to evolve.
Yeah.
But what do you tell that person whose job it is to look at that and see, is it working well and making it better and better? Where do they go after that? And how are you incenting them to do that, I think is worthwhile thinking about.
Yeah, that's great. Switching gears a little bit, I wanted to talk about technology spend and cloud and infrastructure. And I spoke to Steve Randich
Yes.
at FINRA, who was telling me about the days when he was buying data centers in Trumbull, Connecticut, and New Jersey, and all of that. And it's given way to a totally different paradigm where we're using cloud in a lot of different places. But my sense, and I'm curious if you have the similar, is we're moving into now a different regime where you have much more pressure to have a multi-cloud environment, maybe from a cost perspective, maybe from a regulatory perspective, especially in Europe, and even just from a basic risk perspective, having a single operator. And I'm sort of curious, what do you see? That's going maybe back a little bit. Maybe cloud was a few years ago.
I think you've answered the question because you hit all the elements of it. I mean, I think that there's been a lot of movement to the cloud. It's really being evaluated from an operational resiliency perspective in terms of important business services and third-party risks, and how does that all come together? And not just for the regulators, but for your clients. How do you know you're not going to be interrupted, et cetera? Coming back to the cloud point, most right now there's more data in the cloud than any individual institution. Not that I'm saying anything anyone in this room doesn't know. Yep. And the regulators are very concerned about it as a systemic risk matter. Concurrently, large firms that have used cloud over time, I think on average, the numbers I've seen, for the major cloud providers is over the last 4 years, the compound growth rate of the cloud costs have, compound 17 to 22%. That's a big cost. And it's continuing to grow. So people are looking at that and trying to have discussions about how those costs might come down. And some of these big cloud providers, the reality is there's not much choice for people. So, usually when you're dealing with someone, you have a choice. You can go to another strategic vendor, whatever. That's not really the choice here. So it'll be interesting to see how that continues to evolve. I think over the last 6 to 8 months, it's really become a hot topic. Yep. And it's become a hot topic from a regulatory perspective in terms of third-party risk and operational resiliency. It's become big with the regulators in terms of, oh my gosh, these cloud providers could, there could be a lot of systemic risk here. And I think you're going to see, you've already seen some regimes starting to say that they would be regulated. I think you might see that go a lot further than maybe it is today. And then secondly, some companies are looking at, really being more judicious in terms of what they're going to do for themselves versus what they're going to do with some of the cloud providers.
Yeah. So what are
to your points, risk, cost, and future cost.
Yeah. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if you indicated the regulators are paying attention, what's the implication if that becomes like I think DORA.
I think if you look at DORA, which is a regulation in Europe, which many of you may know, and those of you that you don't, you probably have a better life than me because that's what I read. So
put it in ChatGPT.
There you go. Is looking at having regulations around these big cloud providers, and it's not as clear to people what that means.
Yeah.
And so, people like clarity. If you want to regulate something and you have a rule, tell me what the rule is. When there's too much squishiness in that, it's hard for people to deal with it. So anyways, I think that what you're going to see is some of these cloud providers in other jurisdictions, be regulated. And what does that mean? Regulation means it costs more money. And if it costs more money, you're going to pass it on to your clients.
Yeah.
That's why I come back to this notion of, when I was at Morgan Stanley, I started there in 1984. I'd like to say I was 12, but I wasn't. And anyways, it was regulations started coming in, and we, had the perspective of let's work with the regulators. I mean, the notion that the regulators are going to understand your products as well as you is just unfair.
Yeah.
And so by working with them, they would come to us, ask us our opinions, blah, 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 blah. And it really helped with the regulations. Then in the financial crisis, I think, the regulators, I shouldn't put it this way, but they got caught kind of with their pants down. And I think a lot of people got sore about that. And those ties with regulators, I think, became strained. I hope we can get back to those days.
Well, I will say you've got regulators in the room and
do I?
institutions.
Who's the regulators?
Not maybe not.
Now I got to watch my.
Well, it's a good message.
I think it's a tremendous opportunity for regulators to work with institutions, and I think institutions have to be respectful of what the job is of the regulator, which is systemic risk for many regulators. And if you look at, most of the regulations are reasonable. It's just some of them have been there maybe a little too long. And I say that as someone who used to be a big part of a regulator. So anyways, I think that the regulation's going to come with this. And if it doesn't, it's just a matter of time before something happens. And then we'll wish we had gotten on top of it in the first instance. I mean, look at 9/11. Look at all of the know your client rules that came out after 9/11. Did we really need 9/11 to have happen for smart people to know it probably made sense to do some of that? Probably not, but did we go overboard? Different people will have different perspectives on that.
Yeah. So back on the cloud point, when you're talking to CIOs, you're saying this is becoming a hot topic or a hot button issue. What is are you recommending to them they need a different 5-year strategy, or is it, just on the risk radar? What's the...
I've never, and this has nothing to do with the cloud, I think putting all your eggs in one basket is not a good strategy.
Yeah.
The concentration risk is pretty significant. And on the other side of the coin, a multi-cloud strategy is really expensive and in some ways doesn't work.
Yeah.
So you have to think this whole thing through, and you have to work with the cloud providers. But I really believe that, smart people will figure out a way to deal with these issues of concentration, et cetera. And I think that to the extent that cloud providers work with regulators and institutions to come up with solutions, we'll come up with great solutions. And if we don't, we'll probably come up with interim steps that we wish we had worked together. And but people are really smart. They'll figure out a way to make this work.
There's some smart startup ideas in there for somebody in the crowd here.
If someone had a solution to that, yeah. And I never underestimate. I mean, if you went back to 1984 and you landed here in New York and you were gone for a week and you landed in 2000, what year are we in? 2025. Everybody's looking at their phones, but you would think you landed on another planet, right? I mean, just look at how the technology's advanced. I mean, the internet, was just starting. I mean, it's amazing. And the speed within which it happens is so much quicker. So I don't underestimate people's capability to find solutions to problems when they put their head on it. If they don't put their head on it, the problems persist for a while.
Yeah. So parting words of wisdom, I'll go back to AI. We have a lot of folks in the room who are directors, VPs, senior managers building data science AI. When we talk about AI and implementing that in the organizations, what's your advice to them in terms of getting the right executive visibility, helping support their leadership, really champion efforts?
I'm a big believer, whether it's AI or anything else, what is the other party's motivation to working with me on something? And how do I make it easier for them to do that? So, a lot of people are a little bit nervous of AI for a lot of reasons. If you make it friendlier, I've thought through this is what I think the opportunities are, this is why I think you should do this, here's the short-term benefit, here's the long-term benefit, or I don't really know what the benefit is, but I know if you don't do this, our competitors are looking at this, and we don't want to wake up one morning and it not be there. So it's the same as it's always been, but I think when you approach people, there are some people who are quite comfortable saying, I don't know, and there are other people that I feel sorry for them. They need to know everything. I don't know how to be that person. You need to help them through their ego or their fear to do it. But the reality is a lot of people, myself included, have a lot to continue to learn on this. So help us.
Yeah, great, wonderful. Well, Eileen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you all.